Broadcasting live from inside the power band, this is The Blah. In this episode, everybody dies. I'm your host, Kevin, along with the intrepid Canadian axe-wielding superhero Pierre Briere, also known as Ben.
Bonjour.
And the always ready algorithm.
What's going on?
Folks, this week on the podcast, we're going to be talking about something different and something very interesting. A sort of German band of brothers, if you will, titled Generation War. Let's get into it.
Yeah, man. I brought it to the table just because I thought it was interesting and was curious your guys' views. So I'm hoping that you enjoyed it.
I most certainly did. It was intense.
Did you dig it, Benny?
I like the concept. I don't know. I feel like there were some perhaps missed opportunities there.
Sure. Are you into the World War II stuff in general? I don't recall having talked about it much with you.
A little bit. You know, Saving Private Ryan was really good.
Yeah.
I didn't get into Band of Brothers. Just a bandwidth thing, not a, I didn't think it was good. So I'm not sure if I can articulate what I think the missed opportunities are here, but it's an interesting concept, and I just feel like they could have maybe gone some places that they didn't. Like
darker or what?
Despite the fact that it was 4.5 hours of programming, there was a lot of glossing over stuff, for certain. There was a lot of 6 months later kind of,
Right.
Which I wasn't a huge fan of.
Hold on a second. Do we want to, why don't we do some pedigree information for the folks at home? Chad, maybe give a little synopsis, and then we can dive into that stuff.
Into the meat grinder? Yeah, sounds good.
Yeah, let's do that.
Yes, dive into the meat grinder, exactly.
Yeah, so as you mentioned, Kev, it's kind of been called a German band of brothers, which is somewhat accurate. I mean, it gets the point across pretty easily. But unlike Band of Brothers, it had about 1/10 the budget. So, it was about $125 million for Band of Brothers, where it was only $11 million for this. So it shows, the production values aren't quite at the same level. And I mean, obviously one was overseen by Spielberg and whatnot. So, but aside from that, it's essentially talking about and telling some stories in the World War II space from the perspective of the Germans. And as far as the synopsis goes, it's essentially 5 childhood friends that are coming of age right around the time that World War II is kicking off, and it essentially follows them through their experiences of the war. And because they're all quite different people, their experiences are quite different. There's an artsy singer with a Jewish boyfriend. There's a innocent young woman who wants to be a nurse, and then there's 2 brothers, one of whom is a existing military veteran, and the other one is a bit of a new recruit who's quite idealistic and not really into the whole violence thing, a bit more of a philosopher, I suppose. And essentially the show just takes them through the full war from the beginning, when they thought they were invincible and or potentially kind of somewhat sympathetic to some elements of the war, and also the fact that they had a Jewish friend kind of paints an interesting light on everything. So it's a very fictionalized thing, but it's the war chewing them up and spitting them out.
And it was, as Chad said, $11 million budget. We don't know what it made because it aired on television. It was directed by Philipp Kadelbach. It starred Volker Bruch, Tom Schilling, Miriam Stein, Katharina Schuttler, and Ludwig Trepte. These are all German actors, talented German actors, I might add. And that's about it. It was filmed on some locations and on a lot of sound stages and backlots in Potsdam, Germany, and also in Lithuania.
And the reception was extremely controversial, evidently, in a variety of spaces. So,
indeed it was. Yes. Where do we start with a film like this? World War II and the Holocaust, very touchy topic to begin with, as it was so unbelievably horrific. So to see a German production of this I think that kind of piqued my interest more than anything. I'm contrary to Jarhigo, I wouldn't say a huge World War II buff, but I certainly loved Saving Private Ryan. I absolutely loved Band of Brothers. I thought that was incredible and so incredibly well done. And I also played every single Medal of Honor game when those were coming out. I was super into those. So I was really excited to watch this. And it was intense. And it also, I mean, my God, for an 11 million budget, I didn't realize that until you just said it, Chad, but they squoze a ton out of that $11 million because it's really well done. Like, yeah, you can see that the production values aren't quite as high as Band of Brothers, Saving Private Ryan, but my God, man, it was really good.
It was close enough to get the story across, for sure.
More than close enough, yeah, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think, for me, similarly, Kev, like, I've always been a bit obsessed with World War II. My grandfather was in Italy in World War II. I don't think he saw a lot of action, and it was never discussed or anything, so I'm not going to claim any of that kind of crazy stuff, but I've always been really fascinated by it. And I think when I was a child, it was like just fascination with the machinery and airplanes and tanks and guns, like any 6-year-old boy.
Of course.
But later as a teen, I think it was more just being a complete idiot and being fascinated with like the power of warfare versus the machines of warfare. And then kind of now, as an adult, I was fascination with geopolitics. And then very recently, it was always wondering how a society ends up. Like, how is it possible that people end up becoming, a fascist state, and how could that possibly happen? And I don't want to go into great detail, but I don't wonder anymore how that happens, So it's just really interesting to see a German perspective, even if it is glossy, even if it does skip over bits, and even if it is a little bit, light-handed maybe in the eyes of some critics in terms of, putting the Germans as victims as well. I get some of the controversy, but I also really found it interesting that people were willing to explore the space, and it kind of seems like an attempt to process the war, So it's just a really interesting production in that way.
Absolutely.
As far as the glossing thing, Ben, is the time jumping frustrating because they're trying to cram 5 years into 5 hours, or is it more just like they didn't touch on any of the concentration camp stuff, like the real obvious atrocity stuff wasn't really done too much, I guess?
Yeah, they didn't get into, they kind of ignored, they didn't completely ignore, but they kind of ignored some stuff, I think. Perhaps in the interest of trying not to be too controversial or what, hard to say. But yeah, I always get a little annoyed by time skipping, especially in something that's taking its time. As much as reading 4.5 hours of subtitles was a slog for me, I kind of almost would have rather been a glutton for punishment and, had a couple more episodes of it to, flesh things out. I think, it's probably related to budget constraints and that kind of thing. I really can't take anything away from I think the actors were terrific in this.
Right.
I thought they were really good. The story was good outside of the fact that they did some glossing over stuff or, kept it tight for time constraints. The production values were decent, not great. They maybe they went a little too hard for the trying to put you in their kind of perspective and did it, an okay job of it for sure.
Yeah, I kind of assumed that the skipping over of things like the concentration camps was more intentional, or at least I took it as an intentional choice. And I suppose my assumption was that they chose not to discuss it because it's been discussed in so many other ways. And so it kind of seemed like the creators were trying to focus on other areas that maybe hadn't been explored. So that's kind of why I didn't have as much of an issue with the lack of the concentration camp stuff. But that's just me making a lot of assumptions as to what the reasoning was.
No, I mean, I think that's fair. I think for what they were trying to focus on with the story, it makes sense. I guess, in terms of where it was taking place and what they were focusing on.
Yeah. And I suppose the Jewish character, Victor, there's a moment where it kind of seems like he's going to the concentration camps. And as soon as he gets put on a train, I'm like, oh, well, we all know where this is going. He's going to go get beaten to death in a concentration camp and potentially, burned or whatever, or gassed. But it doesn't go there. So it was kind of interesting in a sense that they went a different direction with that. Potentially for that reason, that it's been covered in other things like, a Schindler's List or other, I would presume, other German productions that I haven't seen.
Right. This show, it kept going in directions I didn't expect it to go. And that was something that I really appreciated. So the characters that died and the characters that didn't die were a total surprise to me when I got to the end. I didn't think that was how it was going to dope out. And I really enjoyed that. Like, I was absolutely 1,000% positive Victor was going to the concentration camp. And then, to escape with Alina, the Polish girl, on the train, like, I never thought that would happen. And then to join the Polish resistance.
Yeah.
Was just crazy. I liked how everybody still came home, in a sense, when everything was over. It was just not everybody, not who we thought it was going to be. And they certainly were not in the same state they were when they left.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I really liked that. I thought that it really fit the direction that they went with this, where it was told from the perspective of 5 young, naive people, going into a situation like that. So I don't know. I thought that it fit well with the way they told the story. That doesn't mean that they didn't gloss things over. They certainly did. I mean, I think they sort of stayed away from obvious things. And I don't know. I kind of like that they did that. I kind of like that it was from the perspective of the, quote, everyman, or, 5 kind of everyday people living in Germany. It wasn't about, Oskar Schindler or some hero of the war or Hitler or anything like that. I kind of dug that, actually.
Yeah. Similar. Yeah, it might be worth just briefly touching on the controversy stuff, because I think it kind of adds a bit of perspective. Because I think
No, let's absolutely touch on that. Definitely.
Yeah. I'm not sure how much you guys are aware of the controversy stuff. I mean, it was kind of hard to find much of any dialogue about the show, probably mainly because it's a, German language show. So I'm sure there's plenty of German media or international non-English media about it, but there wasn't a ton out there in English.
No, there was not. I looked as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I read some stuff that, Poland didn't feel like they were being fairly portrayed.
Yeah, which was kind of fair enough, in a way, making it so that every Pole is a racist jerk in the show, whereas there's nuance to the Germans. I can understand the frustration, but
yeah.
I mean, my take on it is I kind of was willing to allow the storytellers to cherry pick stories, they're cherry picking the 5 people, including, having a Jewish friend that's not overly representative of probably the majority of people, but it's just like every other movie or every other story. If every movie was representative of the community, you'd only have 1 in 1,000 movies about the hero, because everyone else is just going to work, So you have to pick the people that are going to drive the story forward. And so while most Germans of that era probably didn't have many Jewish friends, and there were some historians that I saw speaking about how unlikely they thought it was, the producer in response was just yeah, but there are accounts of people hiding their Jewish friends in their house to avoid getting picked up. And just because they're not, literally the everyman doesn't mean they cannot represent the everyman for the purposes of the show. So I'm totally okay with the controversy, and I'm not going to discount anyone's frustrations about it. But for me, I just saw it as picking 5 people to tell a story that hasn't been told before. So it didn't really bother me, but I'm not a Pole, so.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I'll say on top of that, just because it was portrayed that way and people haven't talked about it because so many other atrocities happened during that particular war, doesn't mean it didn't happen. It doesn't mean that there weren't tons of Germans out there that were friends with Jews that disagreed with it,
Yeah.
And we've always learned that, you know, the entirety of Germany was behind the Reich and the Nazi Party and that whole thing. So who's to say that that's accurate? You know what I mean?
Yeah, which is probably completely inaccurate.
Yeah, exactly. But, you know, I did find, thinking back on it now, when I was watching it, I did find the whole notion of the Polish people being so anti-Semitic, like, I did find that surprising. Like, I felt like everywhere Victor went, it was like, oh, well, you're a Jew, so, you know, you need to go, or you need to leave, or, you know, whatever. And I was like, wow, that seems weird. I would think that, or I seem to remember that people were more compassionate about that, you know? Like, I don't know.
It was almost like they made a choice to make it that way to keep the tension sort of ratcheted up for Victor, you know, where like there was danger on all sides for him. And
yeah,
I kind of get it from a storytelling perspective, but yeah, it does seem bizarre that, you know, every Polish person he came across was apparently anti-Semitic. Like, you know, and certainly that was how they reacted in Poland to this. They're like, no, we weren't all anti-Semitic. So
yeah, and rightfully so. I mean, you know, this is just straight from Wikipedia, man. Nothing special here, but there's a historian that's quoted, Lucas Meisel, and he says that historical guilt is often talked about or portrayed in somewhat elusive way, making it easy to relativize. And the stereotypes are advanced to downplay the Nazi German war crimes. And the top one on the list is the Polish people are shown to be almost more anti-Semitic than the Germans themselves. And I can totally see that. So while I did enjoy everywhere that the story went, that is a totally valid complaint.
For sure. And I saw like a roundtable that was on, I think it was on the BBC. I'll put a link to it in the show notes. It's interesting enough. But one of the producers, or the producer, was sitting with historians who just pretty much kicked the shit out of him the whole time. So fair play to him for kind of fighting his corner. But at one point, the Polish thing is brought up with, you know, a Polish historian and other, you know, dudes from Cambridge and stuff. So the response from the producer to kind of what you were getting at a second ago, Kev, was like, yeah, fair, but, you know, at one point, Friedhelm shoots a 5-year-old boy in the back, and at another point, an SS officer blows a girl's brains out. And, you know, so like war crimes are happening, and there is a lot of atrocity that the German characters are participating in. But I think where I agree with the quote that you said was like choosing to have German characters with nuance and then choosing to have Polish characters kind of photocopied as anti-Semitic. Like, it does fit that quote of like, you know, the guilty glossing over certain things. So like, I totally agree there's validity to the point, but it's interesting to hear the producer's kind of counter opinion, their counterpoint, I suppose.
I think one thing that you said is really important. The little girl gets shot by the SS officer. Friedhelm shoots the kid in the back. I mean, they did not gloss over atrocities. They may not have spent any time on any popular or more widely publicized atrocities, but it was very gritty. That stuff is horrifying, man. Seeing kids get shot like that. Like, I mean, there was many points in this where I was very emotionally reactive. I can tell you that. I mean, certainly now as somebody that has kids, like, it was awful, man. The things that happened in that war were awful. And, you know, we know that. Seeing it from this perspective, like, they didn't add any fluff to it to make it
better.
Less atrocious. Yeah, better.
Yeah, it's interesting that you should say that too, because the actual title of the show is Our Mothers, Our Fathers. It's not Generation War. So like, it's super interesting that the title is Our Mothers, Our Fathers when you know, as an outsider or as a non-German and as a young person who wasn't even a glimmer in the eye when this stuff happened, the atrocities that were occurring around this story would have been known well enough by the audience generally, I would imagine. And like, you know, it's assumed by the storytellers that this isn't the first time you've ever seen anything about World War II. So I kind of am in that vein even additionally forgiving of, you know, not diving into the concentration camp thing, for example.
Yes.
But anyways, I think that like covers the controversy pretty well. I was thinking, it might make sense to dig into the actual episodes, and high level on that is it's interesting that there's only 3 episodes, and it's kind of like the 3 acts, I suppose, and it's just an interesting structure and interesting way to tell the story.
Yes, and I don't know, other miniseries have been done like that, hour at a clip, hour and a half at a clip. So, I mean, certainly in the heyday of television, being on network and even cable, it's not like it hasn't been done before. I think the format's good. I mean, obviously it's lost on me because it's on Amazon Prime streaming. So, I just gobbled it all up, or more like force fed myself.
Be a weird show to experience with commercial breaks, for example.
Wow. Yeah, that's a good point, man. I hadn't really thought about commercial breaks in the classic sense in a while.
No, but like SS dude just blows a little girl's brains out, and it's like, brought to you by Bounty, and you're just like, whoa.
Yeah, right.
Jesus Christ.
That's so
because that's kind of probably how a lot of people saw it for the first time. It was 2003, I suppose, when it came out. So
don't you mean Dare Bounty?
Oh, Dare Bounty.
The Bounty.
I didn't know if we were going to have any jokes in this particular episode, but I'm glad that there's at least one.
I didn't either, man, because the subject matter was so
dark.
So dark, So it's like
I'll just say Das Bounty because I'm not really sure which one it should be, but
oh no, it is Das Bounty.
Now we've covered all our bases.
No, it is Das Bounty because German uses conjugation just like many other European languages. So yeah, the Das would be neutral. So you were correct, and Chad and I were dead wrong.
I like how it's like, yeah, we had a joke. That was really good. We had a nice light moment. Let me jump into a language lesson.
Yeah, let's deconstruct the joke and see if we can make it funnier.
That's good stuff. So what was your first, I guess, episode 1? Like, kind of where did it take you?
Hold on, quick aside here. A bunch of my friends took German in high school because the teacher was notoriously easy, and he would, teach useful things like slang and swears. So there was a lot of swearing in German going on in my school.
German swears are pretty legit.
They are. Yeah, anything in German that is an exclamation sounds super legit.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I think I heard Arschloch in this program at one point, and I was like, oh, asshole, I know that.
Didn't need to read that subtitle.
All right. Aside over.
No, that was a good aside. I like that. So, Chad, go ahead. You were talking about episode 1.
No, nothing. I was just going to say controversy covered. Structure was interesting. I'm curious kind of what hit you in the first episode, kind of go through it a little bit.
The father was really... He clearly was not into his younger son. His younger son was like the philosopher, the dreamer, the idealist. That's a tough yoke to wear, man, as a kid, especially from a German dad. All the German dads seem more intense even than the non-German dads. So
that dude seemed like a full-blown Nazi dickhead, though. So adding that layer on there, too, was just like, all right, he's a dick.
And not much of a stretch either, right?
Right.
Charlotte had a way about her that seemed like I always felt there was something brewing underneath. Like, I don't know what, an uncertainty, a fear of what's to come, maybe fear of admitting to Wilhelm how she feels about him. But I felt like that was somewhat ever present throughout all 3 episodes. Certainly the first one was when I picked up on it. And I really liked that, though. And I liked that choice by that actress. And I thought she played that well.
I have a theory about that. You were talking about something going on, sort of brewing below the surface. And I think that was because she was in a previous life, Princess Nausicaä of the Valley of the Wind. And she'd already been in, these kind of, idealistic conflicts before, and nearly died for the cause. So, I think she saw what was coming, and she was afraid.
Right.
Okay, I can get down with that.
Did Did you guys get that vibe from that actress that she like? I'm like, oh my god, if they made a fucking live version of like a live action version of that movie, they have to get this woman to play the part because she looks totally like exactly like her.
Yeah,
I like it. I like it a lot. I like how it's the first time in a history of our show where instead of doing a callback to a previous episode, you're doing a time jump to an upcoming episode. I love that.
Mm-hmm. Well, you know, we gotta promote where we can. So
yeah, fucking A.
You know, you're talking about a live action version of an animated film. Like that never happens. You know, certainly a Miyazaki film does not need to be turned into a live action mess.
It'll be really interesting. I'm sure it'll happen at some point. Probably once he's dead.
Well, you know, I think it's only a matter of time, considering that they've already done Ghost in the Shell and now they're doing Akira, and you know.
Anyway, so what the hell were we talking about?
Yeah, just the kind of episode 1 stuff. I think like just to touch on what you were saying about Friedhelm, the younger son. I found myself really identifying with him in the sense of like, you know, putting myself into the shoes of a young adult at that time in Germany. I think that like I probably would have been very similarly minded to Friedhelm in the sense of like being a bit of a pacifist and not wanting to get involved, but being forced and conscripted into the army. And so, you know, identifying with him early really was an interesting thing considering how his character, you know, developed and kind of went to the dark side and hardened over. So it was kind of an interesting space to identify with, because you're just like, oh yeah, that's, you know, something I would probably do. And then he's all of a sudden starts shooting children and you're like, okay, I don't identify with him anymore, you know? And so it's just kind of it's a great way to tell. I kind of feel like that was probably the intention, at least, you know, from the male storyteller's perspective, to have you kind of enter the story through the eyes of the person who doesn't want to be a participant, and then having that go to complete shit. It really, it's striking.
He and Wilhelm were sort of opposite sides of the coin, you know, where Wilhelm went in, the veteran, and came out softened, and you know, Friedhelm was hardened and changed, you know, for the worse. So
I definitely thought he was going to get greased like first, like in the first 20 minutes of the whole thing. Like, yeah. I mean, it was like that seemed so obvious. I'm so glad they didn't do that. Yeah.
Although I am glad that he died at the end, because otherwise he would have very much been one of the nihilists in Lebowski. Like he started off like so happy-go-lucky and then just ended up a complete nihilist. Just didn't give a fuck.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, well, I guess we're just talking about the first episode now, so.
No, we can jump around.
I'll save it. But, you know, when they're trying to take that, like, I don't know, what was it, like a telegraph tower or whatever?
Radio station, yeah.
The radio station, that was, yeah, that seems like the moment where Friedhelm kind of, you know, flew the coop.
Yeah, he cracks. Well, fair enough. Everybody dies and he gets in there and he's just like, what the hell?
Yeah, like we're in here for this? What the fuck? And that was one of the more, I think, intense moments in the film, I think.
Oh my God, yes, absolutely, dude. Super intense. I mean, you know, and from Wilhelm's perspective, it's like he wakes up, he thinks his entire platoon is dead.
And his brother,
right? And then Friedhelm, he thinks his brother's dead. So, you know, my God, man.
Yeah, it's almost like the thinking that the other is dead is what changes both of them. One for the better and one for the worse, you know?
Ooh, wow, that's nice. Yeah, I didn't exactly pick up on that. Yeah, that's really, really nice, Ben.
And even the transition out of that scene outside of the two brothers was interesting, where, you know, it kind of has a enemy at the gates vibe, where they're stuck in this shitty telegraph station waiting for whatever, and nobody comes to help them. And his green friend, who's like, or not friend, his green, you know, soldier buddy, who's doesn't even have a name, he's number 1 or number 2, like pokes his head up and gets blown out, you know, gets his head blown off. So it was kind of an intelligent way to close that scene, because it, like, not only did they take a stupid thing for stupid reasons, but then, you know, the green kid gets his head blown off and Friedhelm ends up dressing like a Russian to get out of the situation. So it was well handled.
And then gets shot himself.
And that, yeah, by his own people. Yeah.
Not just his own people, his own unit.
Yeah.
Which I just thought was, I don't know, that was a little crazy, but yeah.
It is and it isn't. Like, I like how in different moments, these people get so, I don't know, shell-shocked is the right word, but, you know, trying to survive that, you know, out in the snow, he tries on an opponent's winter jacket and then gets, you know, shot at for similar reasons. You know, you could totally see how a person in that environment would be in pure survival mode and not being like, hey, if I put on an enemy jacket, I might get shot at by my own people, you know?
Yeah, right. No, exactly. I mean, I don't see how you couldn't be in survival mode. And I think that when he put on that jacket was a part of the reason he didn't get completely filled with bullets.
From behind, yeah.
Yeah, when the Russians were running out of the forest.
Yeah, it was super interesting.
You know? Yeah, I think I remember one of my notes from episode 1 was just like, firstly, I didn't think that they were going to go in the direction of covering the Russian front. Like, I guess, I don't know. It's funny how your like sort of preconceived notions can work inside your head, and you think like, oh, you know, the World War II, and it's like you've seen all these things from the American perspective, and it's like they spent the entire time in Russia. I was so not expecting that at all, and it was an interesting backdrop for sure. And it also, I think, really helped to start to show the futility of what the Germans were trying to do. I mean, they were fighting two fronts, man, Russia and the Allies. And Germany's a small country. It's not like Russia or the US where it's huge and there's tons of people. I mean, I guess population really doesn't matter. But at any rate, I just thought that was an interesting choice. I liked it. It was different. And, you know, one of the notes I made was when he commented that, you know, their first winter there, it was 40 degrees below zero.
Mm-hmm.
It was 7 degrees when I woke up yesterday here in New England. And that is extremely cold, like exposure danger cold, right? I cannot imagine with 1940s technology in terms of clothing and warmth, sitting in an open air makeshift barrack that they made out of logs dug into the ground. I just like, I cannot even wrap my head around how they were able to deal with that.
Yeah. The only other thing I've got on Wilhelm is I kind of thought it was interesting that he's, you know, a veteran to a degree of fighting previously. He's a lieutenant, and he's got ideals, and it's interesting how those ideals bounce off of his superiors, and they're just kind of like, no, this war's different. You know, you shouldn't object to that girl getting shot in the head, and like, no, you need to change how you think about this. And I kind of thought that was an interesting, you know, storytelling device to have the character who still has some ideals left bouncing off of people that don't.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think in general, because Charlotte does that a couple of times as well, and I really like that they showed how that sort of thing was handled. You know, like, I mean, talk about living in a society of like fear and paranoia. Like everybody was like basically telling on everybody else. Nobody was safe. It was like you step out of line, somebody is going to report you, and you're going to disappear into a black bag. I mean, it was crazy, you know, and just like, I was surprised that he only got warnings, you know, in the beginning. It was like, you know, watch what you say, or you may want to change, you know, like, just like you said, you may want to change the way you're thinking. Like, I don't know. It was a good point of conflict for the story, you know, because we're really talking about from the perspective of 5 people. This is not a war movie per se. This is about,
it's a character study.
The perspective of 5 German young people. So, yeah, I really liked how they covered that and then covered it again and again and again. And it just kept coming up, you know.
It's a good segue to, you know, the Jewish character Victor and his relationship with Greta, which I thought was an interesting addition. I really, the kind of major note that I have on the first episode was the Berlin issue where the Jewish family that Victor is a part of are trying to, you know, figure out what's going on, and the father doesn't believe that there's going to be any problems, and he's just like, no, we got to get out of here. We got to get out of here. And Greta eventually manages to kind of sleep with that Gestapo guy, and the bait and switch of the fake papers. It was just kind of a mind-blowing moment.
Well, yeah, I mean, that entire, you just sort of covered a lot in a couple of sentences. I mean, I really like the inclusion of Victor's dad kind of, like, I don't think saying that he was in denial is the right thing, because it was more than that. What was really cool about that dynamic with the dad was that the father had served in the previous war, and he was such a loyalist to Germany, and he was so proud of being from Germany and serving his country and doing whatever it took to serve his country. So really, when they decided to, quote, send the Jews east, like, talk about having the wind taken out of your sail, man. Like, that is soul crushing, man. I mean, not from the perspective of you're going to a concentration camp. Of course, that's horrible. But I'm saying, just put that aside for a second. Like, that's really, really rough to deal with. So
it would destroy his identity. Yeah.
Well, exactly, man. So it's not a surprise at all that the guy was in denial, and you could see that he was just absolutely crushed by that, One thing about this series is that they were able to elicit a lot of really great moments with not a lot of time to tell this story, and what they did, the dynamics with the family, and I think it really is a compliment to the writers and the actors as well, is what they were able to sort of wring out of that. And they got a lot out of that relationship with Victor and his parents, that dynamic that I just explained with the dad, and also just between Victor and his mom. Like, I was really touched when he finally left, thinking he was going to go to New York. And it's like, he hugs his mom and she's essentially letting him go. Like, he's, these guys are in their early 20s. Yeah. And it's like, he's essentially going into adulthood, and she realizes, like, he has to go off now and like do his own thing and try to make his own way. And that has got to be such a difficult thing for any parent, It was incredibly touching, and it definitely struck a chord with me for sure.
Did the fake papers thing stir anything up for you, Benny?
I was listening to Kevin. I was thinking about the fact that it was interesting. The fact that Victor's father, and even Victor himself to a degree, seemed rather wrapped up in his German identity. We don't think about that a lot, but there's an interesting take on things that, like, even after Victor and Alina escape and they're about to part ways, he's like, I guess I'll go back to Germany. Like, why would you do that, man? Like,
because that's your home.
I just thought that was, yeah, exactly. And I thought that was an interesting take on things. It's not something that people think a lot about, but,
yeah,
Jews weren't just Jewish. They were, in this particular case, they were German as well.
Exactly, man.
That's a really, really interesting point, man. Yeah, I hadn't really thought about it like that, but it really kind of hammers home how the Germans saying that the Jews are other has kind of permeated the opinion after the fact too. Like, you're kind of like, yeah, okay, the Jews are not German because Germans are horrible and they're Nazis. But like, when you actually like step back and think logically as opposed to emotionally, it makes perfect sense that of course they're German, like, that's really interesting.
Yeah.
I know, but nobody ever talks about it. That's what I was alluding to. It's like, this is a perspective that we never see. We never hear about this, is that these people were Germans, man, and this German in particular was a proud German who served his country on the battlefield and off the battlefield after the war, and they even, at one point, somebody says, I don't remember who it was, one of the characters in one of the episodes, how after the war, the First World War, the Jews like undermined them or undermined Germany or ruined Germany or whatever. And it's like, that's heavy duty, man, and then they use that sort of as their, Hitler used that as the impetus for a lot of the things that he did. And I mean, that's just crazy, man. I mean, you're talking about your own people.
Yeah. And I mean, we probably won't go too far down the rabbit hole, but it's, a classic us and them, like, clearly there is no difference in terms of, everyone's a human being. And it's such a shame that cultures are treated as if they are different species sometimes, specifically like to the point where, the Jews were considered subhuman and killed as a result in the Holocaust. We've all seen and heard and learned about these things in a variety of ways, but both of you guys are saying it, but it really is something I hadn't thought of before, in the sense of the fact that, of course, people that were born and raised in Germany, regardless of religion, are German. So it would be very confusing and devastating for them too, in a variety of ways.
I think that's all I had for episode 1. Just sort of, and it's just sort of a general note, I guess, just that the sort of fear and futility of war, and you kind of grasp early on that they're all kind of feeling that in one way or another, even though their perspectives are different.
Yeah. There seems to still be like a bit of hope that it is for the right reasons. You know, like some of the scenes with the soldiers driving around in the back of a truck, and these dudes are like, yeah, you know, we're getting more land so that we can all have a piece of land, and Germany will be great as a result of us growing and building a great thing. And while obviously from the outside it's ridiculous, there's kind of that like hopefulness that it is for the right reasons thing. And, you know, like it kind of feels like episode 1 is set up and keeping a little bit of a sprinkling of hope, and then, you know, obviously the rest of the show just crushes that hope.
Absolutely. The only other note I had for episode 1 was when, and I think too, this was, I don't know, not really a turning point for Friedhelm, but when he walks into the woods and he's still very resistant of the whole movement and being in the military and what was going on, and, you know, the entire platoon was, you know, ashamed of him. And he steps on all those bodies that are buried just below the surface, and there's blood coming through the mud, and there's just flies everywhere. It was just, again, intense and very much showing you the atrocity of war.
The end of the first episode and the beginning of the second episode seems like I believe there's a time hop, and in that time hop, Friedhelm goes from, you know, anti-violent philosopher to perfectly willing to shoot someone in a lineup. So I kind of feel like that blood scene is kind of the last time you see him as still anti-violence, I suppose.
Yeah, that's what I was sort of alluding to, but I wasn't sure. That's why I pulled back. Yeah,
I'm pretty sure that like the beginning of episodes 2 and 3 start with some actual World War II footage and a bit of narration being like, and now a year has passed and blah, 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 blah. This is happening on the Russian front and da-da-da-da-da. So, yeah, thinking back, I'm pretty sure that that's the case. But there's one of your time hops, Benny.
Yeah, which is just not one of my favorite things, period, in any movie, any film, any show.
Damn it. I suppose I didn't have a problem with the time hop thing, but now that we kind of honed in on the fact that Friedhelm goes from non-violent soldier to violent soldier in that time hop, that's a pretty big change. And so it would have potentially been interesting to explore that a bit more, but they chose not to do it.
Exactly. Yes, I agree with that.
So I buy what you're selling in that regard, Benny. Like jumping over something as complex as that is the easy way out, as opposed to actually trying to tackle the material.
Well, they may not have been trying to take the easy way out, Chad. They may have been making a really difficult choice.
Sure. Yeah, that's fair.
But at the same time, I agree with you. That's huge. That's a huge thing to gloss over, you know, the transformation.
And it's interesting because like I only wrote down 2 words as a note for episode 2 and just called it the change. So like episode 2 is essentially like everyone changing rather drastically. And I suppose I had assumed in hindsight that it was like the episode was where they changed. But in this particular case, Friedhelm was changed at the beginning of episode 2. Like he was, you know, shooting somebody, a partisan in a lineup or whatever it was, quite early on.
Right.
One thing I really enjoyed about episode 2 was Greta becoming a star because of her association with that Gestapo guy. That was a really interesting thread.
Yeah, it was. And that was the only other, I think, note that I left out from the season 1 was just I wrote the constant rape, but it wasn't exactly rape, sort of.
It was transactional, that's for sure.
Yeah, it was transactional. But then later on, you know, in episode 2, she seems to kind of fall for him, like in a sense. I don't know. It was... That was a really weird and complex relationship.
Messy.
Very messy, you know? So it was like he was just having his way with her over and over and made her into a star. And I feel like, obviously, like every character in the story, she transitioned, she changed, she was broken, essentially. I mean, everybody gets broken in this. I mean, everybody gets broken, period, in life at some point. And, all 5 of these people get broken. And that was the point where she got broken, was him just, having her over and over again, and then it was kind of like, after so much of it, it's like you kind of lose yourself, and then it's like you're kind of, she kind of falls for him sort of a little bit, I don't know. It was really interesting dynamic, but like in episode 2, when I saw them kissing at one point, I was like, wow, she's like falling for this guy. And I was like, that's messed up,
I didn't really take it as a falling for him thing. Like I rewatched the series this week. It kind of jumped around a bit, but on a second viewing, I kind of developed a bit more of a nuance of how I perceived that particular relationship, where I think like quite obviously she's super egotistical, so she's, seems to feel she's untouchable, and she is, choosing to be transactional in order to get the papers, for example, for Victor, and choosing to be transactional once it becomes clear that this Gestapo guy could get her a recording deal or whatever. He offers it, and she's like, oh yeah, totally, man, let's do this. So I kind of took it a lot. I took her side of that relationship as doing what needed. She was choosing to do what needed to be done to become a star, and okay, fine. But on second viewing, it was pretty clear to me that he just didn't give a shit, and that's pretty obvious. But I just found it quite remarkable how cold he was, and how she had a bit of a pout at one point, and his response was, "We're going to send you on tour." And I kind of have a bit of a feeling that him sending her on tour was like he was hoping she wasn't going to come back. You know what I mean?
Ooh, I never thought about that. Yeah. Wow. That's a good point.
He was just getting rid of a problem, because she's like, maybe I'll go call your wife and go have a coffee with her. And he's like, maybe I'll send you on an airplane to the front lines and you'll get shot.
Yeah. And she very nearly did. I mean, she ended up getting left behind because she had to have all her little things. And that was really the impression I got from her, was that she was so in denial about the reality and the brutality of the situation, and, even to the point where when they have that little mini reunion, it's the 4 of them, and she talks about Victor being in New York and going to visit his parents. And it's like, she went to their house and somebody else was living there, like totally in denial about what was going on on a lot of levels,
Kev, you said it. You used my angle. I was, in terms of talking about Greta, denial was definitely number one. That she just seemed to be in denial of everything that was going on around her.
Like right up until Charlotte was like, basically put your fucking bags down, pick the stretcher up, let's go.
Right.
And then she was just like,
That's her introduction to what's really going on.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
I almost just said, are you German? Like the professor in The Fifth Element. Irony. Hello. No, nothing. Wow. Okay. Let's move on.
That's like a freaking, yeah, that you stepped on a landmine there, bro. I like it.
I don't know.
You gonna contest that one?
In my mind, I will say this. In my mind, it played out much differently than what actually just happened.
Yeah, and then you get like, she comes home, she picks up the stretcher or whatever, she kind of gets her eyes open, and she comes home and talks shit in the bar and gets picked up. That was interesting.
Well, that was where the beginning of the end started for her.
Yeah. And then, she tries to act like she has power over the Gestapo guy by saying she's pregnant, and then like he obviously does some horrible, horrible stuff. Punches her in the stomach or whatever. That was pretty heavy duty.
That was really heavy duty, man.
It just clearly stripped away any remaining control that she might have thought she had over the situation and over him. And so,
oh, no question about it, man.
Yeah, that dynamic between them was really interesting and horrible.
Yeah, she thought she had a lot of control, but in the end, it was like, yeah, no, you don't. And we're just going to put you in prison. So
Yeah.
there you go. See ya. Bye.
See ya. Yeah, it's quite heavy. But I like that it didn't go fairy tale with any of the, none of the characters got away unscathed. Everyone got pretty much just ground to dust.
Absolutely ground to dust, man. I mean, they were visibly ghost-like when they reunited at the bar at the end.
Yeah. I mean, it didn't go the way of like The Pianist, for example, with Adrien Brody was an incredible transformation into that skeletal character by the end of that film. So it didn't quite go that route with it, but they definitely had their own way of being destroyed, I suppose.
I wrote a couple of lines down that I thought were really good. Maybe they are, maybe they aren't. I liked them. One is when Wilhelm, I believe it's pretty sure it's Wilhelm, says the only winners of the war are the flies, and we fatten up their flesh. I was like, wow, that's it's very true, and it's very depressing. It's like, I don't know. There's like a desolation and a desperation to that.
Yeah,
it sums it up like in a really simple way of the cycle of life on the planet. You know what I mean? I don't know. I really like that quote. And
it captures the despair a bit too.
Yeah, exactly. The despair. That's a good word, a descriptive word to use. Part of the multi-stage unhinging of Wilhelm and Friedhelm, is like Friedhelm, he kind of had it figured from the start, was that war is pointless and the whole thing was pointless. And, it was bad. Like he knew, like it was just a bad scene all the way around, like what they were doing to the Jews, the whole thing. And then he flips out on his brother about that, he's like, we're just pigs, we're just more meat for the grinder essentially. But then he says, if we die out there tomorrow, I expect you to lead us. From being the idealistic dreamer who was the shame of the squad, or not the squad, but the platoon, to the guy who's basically telling his brother, like, you need to get your shit together. Like, this is a total meat grinder. It's a slaughterhouse. I knew it. I told you that from the get-go. And, pull your pants up. You will be leading us tomorrow. I expect you to do just that.
That was a powerful scene.
It was just intense. Yeah, it was super powerful, man. Like, really, really powerful scene. I really enjoyed it.
And it's interesting how that scene plays out, like, a few hours before they both completely flip and break and it all goes to shit.
Yeah, exactly.
One thing we didn't really touch on was Victor and, getting put on the train and escaping and stuff. I don't know if you had any, what was your, Benny, what was your kind of reaction to that whole thing? Because it was quite an interesting thread to the whole story, even though it was kind of separate from everybody.
I found Victor's arc to be pretty compelling and interesting.
And satisfying, yes.
Yeah, and satisfying. It's like we knew he wasn't going to get away and go to New York. That just wouldn't play into the story very well. Unless he, joined the U.S. forces or something and came back over.
Sure.
Otherwise, he wouldn't make it to the bar at the end there. But yeah, it was interesting where he ended up, and that he ended up fighting with what did they call the Polish resistance?
I think it was just the partisans or something, wasn't it?
The partisans, yeah.
No, the partisans were the ones that were collaborating with the Germans.
Yeah, okay.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not clear on that. But I thought it was interesting that he ended up fighting with the resistance, and that he was sort of sandwiched between, the war and the Nazis, but also at the same time sandwiched between, these resistance fighters who were quite anti-Semitic. I found it was very satisfying when they take over that train to get the weapons, and he decides to, fuck it, I'm gonna let these people go. And he's like the hero of the moment up until then. So it's kind of crazy that they turned their back on him at that point. And I know the main guy, the leader didn't per se. And it was probably best that he left, because otherwise somebody probably would have like killed him in his sleep or something. But yeah, like that scene was quite interesting, where they take over the train, and, there's like one guy that they missed who's like sniping people, and he gets up and sort of runs to draw the fire while the other guy takes him out. I thought that was, it's like in that moment, everybody's like cheering for him. And then like 2 seconds later, he's making probably, arguably one of the most moral decisions made in the movie. And, everybody's shitting on him for it.
Everyone's like, what are you doing, man?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was, and he got grazed on the neck too, man. Like, my God, came so close to dying in that.
Really close.
Yeah, I mean, it was crazy. And just a quick correction. You guys were right. I was wrong. It is the Partisans.
Okay, cool. Yeah, no worries. Yeah, his kind of on the cattle train situation, and then what's the girl's name? Anya or something?
Alina, I believe.
Alina. I really enjoyed kind of the way that the relationship between him and Alina kind of plays out, because in the traditional Hollywood sense, they would have ended up, falling in love or some dumb shit. And I'm so glad that they kind of didn't, even with, even with Charlie and Wilhelm, they didn't go the traditional route. So, like, it's not a love story, it's a meat grinder story. So I really liked the way that they escape the train and they're kind of running from field to field and farm to farm, and the way it all kind of unfolds. And even in that scene you're talking about, she's like, yeah, don't open the train, dude. Kind of gives him a little bit of a don't do it nod,
Mm.
Yeah, she did do that. I remember that now.
Any thoughts on her and their relationship?
I like the character. I actually thought they were going to get together, and I don't mean that in a cheesy, like, okay, we need to have a romance in here kind of way. I just thought, like, wow, these two might bond over this horrific experience, and I could totally see the two of them, like, showing up later, like, married or whatever. Like, I don't know why I went there in my mind, but
it's because that's where most stories go, though, I think, and I think it's not unreasonable to think that.
Yeah, I don't know, man.
Same thing happened to me. If it's any consolation, I figured they were going to end up together too.
Okay, that
yeah, same.
Ben, that does actually make me feel better.
Yeah, it's exactly the same. I felt the same way, and I think the fact that they didn't added gravity to her situation where she was separated from her kids or whatever. I can't remember the details of that one, but
her kids.
Yeah, there's a scene where they're in like a haystack in the farm, and she finally opens up and says like she got knocked up. Maybe by a soldier. There was something, there was complications there.
No, it was by a German family. Like, they brought her in there to work, and then the wife couldn't have children, so
okay.
They used her to get pregnant, but the guy wanted a son, and I don't remember what became of the little girl.
Yeah, there you go. So like, I think that's a more interesting space than she and Victor hook up. Like, I kind of like that it was, in a way, like, having them get together, even despite the tragedy, could have been seen to like take away from the tragedy. Like, I think it's more valuable to the story to focus on the various tragedies than it is to kind of resolve anything with love stories and stuff. So it's kind of saying the same thing again. But
totally, dude, I absolutely agree with that. Like, if they had added a love story, like, but I wasn't talking about a love story. I was talking about them.
Yeah.
Getting married. Like, I don't know, there's definitely a difference in what I'm saying, like, because I hate when they add in unnecessary romantic nonsense in movies, and it happens, as we well know, way too much. But yeah, overall, Victor's arc was just, it was really, really good. It did not go where I thought it was going to go, and I really enjoyed that, just seeing the Polish resistance. And again, now that we've talked about, we talked about the controversy, and we kind of covered a lot of the Polish stuff and Victor stuff when we talked about the controversy. But having talked about that controversy of the Polish being anti-Semites, I like it less now at the end of this show than I did at the beginning. It really is starting to bother me, actually.
But the payoff with the main guy letting him go, I think, was good, interesting storytelling. And I think that's probably why they went the tension building anti-Semitism, like you were mentioning, Ben, is all the payoff with the guy choosing not to shoot him in the woods. So
sure, but like the historian that I quoted earlier from Wikipedia was saying that they essentially made the Polish out to be bigger anti-Semites than the Germans themselves, to sort of downplay the German. And I really, when you watch it, and I just watched it, finished watching it last night, it's like, it's true. That's exactly what they did. It's like, it's just not, I don't know. It's not
like
right.
If they made the choice like we think they did for the sake of the storytelling, it's almost like it was an egregious error not to balance it out with some, with more portrayal of anti-Semitism on the German side, like.
Sure. Yeah.
So yeah, it is a little bizarre, and it almost seems like I think they did it for the sake of the story, but it almost does seem like a little bit of a smoke and mirrors move to sort of try and draw attention away from what's actually going on here. And the movie really dances around that. There's not a lot of. They're talking about the war with the Russians. There's not a lot of talk about what's going on back in Germany, other than what happens to Victor, which I guess is fine. But and you also get the impression that the main characters, like Friedhelm and Wilhelm and Greta and Charlie, like they don't seem like I don't really know how things unfolded in actual history, but like at the point where they're all sort of hopeful and they're like, oh yeah, we'll be together next Christmas. It doesn't seem like anybody's aware of the fact that there's going to be a genocide.
Yeah.
It doesn't seem, like the danger of that doesn't seem to be very real in any of their minds, or it certainly doesn't seem to be a motivating factor, because they're, one of their best friends is Jewish, and they're listening to swing music, and, they kind of get into trouble a little bit for it or whatever, and.
Right. But Ben, I don't really think they got the depth of, and I don't think a lot of people got the depth of what exactly was going on with the concentration camps. Like, and they were being told propaganda as well to keep them, their spirits high and their resolve, solid, for the fatherland. So, I don't know. Like there was very much like, and I'm not just talking. Go ahead.
I was going to say, it's almost like there were varying levels of indoctrination going on there, where some people were kept in the dark about things for the sake of like what you were talking about. And other people were brought into the fold,
Well, yeah, I'm just saying that, like, it happens all the time in all of the countries in the world. It's like we're told a version of what's going on that paints it in a different light or downplays it. And it wouldn't surprise me at all if that's exactly what the Nazis did. You know what I mean? Like, and that they didn't really know the extent of what was happening to the Jews, because the dad himself even says, or Victor says to his dad, the Jews are being sent east. Like, okay, well, like, what does that mean? That doesn't mean anything. You know what I mean? Like, that's very ambiguous. Like, he wasn't saying, oh, the Jews are being taken to concentration camps. Like, I don't think that was widely publicized, certainly not in the beginning. They needed to have the entire country behind them. And that is like a, genocide level activity you're talking about. I can't imagine if they had announced that straight away when they went into the war, that the entirety of Germany would be like, oh yeah, okay, let's go. Like,
no, of course not.
That's heavy, dude.
I'm sure there were some people that were completely on board with that.
Oh, no doubt.
One would think the majority of people wouldn't be. It's easy to think of everybody in Germany at the time being. I mean, I think that's what this movie is sort of trying to say is, it's easier to imagine everyone being evil, but of course, not everyone was. Most of them were just normal people, ordinary people, running with poor ideas, I guess is a way to put it.
Yeah, along for the ride. The that roundtable discussion that I was talking about earlier, some of the historians kind of talked about that, and one of the guys' major complaints was how unrealistic he thought all 5 characters were at the beginning. He basically was just like, I'm paraphrasing, but he said, like, it's basically bullshit. You're not going to find 5 people that are friends with a fucking Jew. At that time, they all would have been indoctrinated with propaganda. They all would have been, raised as tweens in the Hitler Youth, and it would not have been anywhere near, that reality. And the producer, to his credit, disagreed and said there were documented cases of people helping other people and stuff. But I thought it was interesting, this historian just chiming in and being like, the Germans at that time would have been very aware of the anti-Semitism, if not the, Holocaust-style genocide. But it's, I don't know. It's just a storytelling choice, I guess. And
yeah, I don't know enough about the actual history, but
yeah, same.
Even in the case of, it was an unrealistic portrayal, and like you said, they would have all been indoctrinated in the Nazi youth. The operating term there is everybody was being indoctrinated.
Yes.
These are what potentially would have been normal people running some really terrible software. Being indoctrinated with some really bad ideas.
But once you run the software and do a terrible thing, it kind of changes. And I suppose that's the point of the show in a way.
I suppose, yeah.
Showing what happens when they do horrible stuff, yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's not horrible stuff if you believe that what you're doing is right.
And righteous.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not defending it by any stretch of the imagination.
No, of course not. Of course not. But I think, where you're going with it, though, is like, it's an interesting space because, history is written by the victor. And, at that time, the victor in Germany was the Nazi party. So, like, the indoctrination would have been very successful, or seems to have been very successful, which is scary. Like, obviously looking back, you're like, how the hell could that have happened? And as I mentioned earlier, like, I don't have any question as to how that happens anymore, considering the state of affairs globally at the moment with all of the various governmental problems that are going on. But
yeah,
to reiterate what I said earlier, like, I'm okay with the massive amounts of glossing over, because I think talking about this era of history from the perspective of the people that were considered the villains is interesting, and it could be educational. Well, it was educational for me, at least. Like, I found it fascinating to even just like put myself in the shoes of these people and recognizing how, a normal person gets indoctrinated and then eventually does horrible war criminal things. It was a fascinating experience, even though it was a horrible story that was told.
Right. And that's the beauty of perception, man. Is that your perspective and your perception change everything. Like just what you said. If you think it's right and you think it's righteous, or if that's all you know, then that's all you know. You can't get upset with somebody because they've been taught that way, and that's the only thing they've been taught is kill, kill, kill. It's like,
well, I mean, you can get upset with them, but I know what you mean.
You can't, because they are doing what they learned and what they were taught. Like, not so. It's not their fault that they're like that. It's like they're just doing what they've learned. It's as simple as that.
But you can stop them, I suppose.
Well, you can absolutely stop them. You can teach them different ways. You can open their minds. You can pull them out of the situation and let them open their own minds. But, you certainly can't get upset with them for doing something that they've been taught to do, that they've learned to do. Yeah,
it's a super hot button, period. And one of the interesting nuggets that fell out of it was the producer saying, like, this is the last chance we have to have a dialogue with the people that actually were in it, because the people that were alive at that time are basically, at the end of their lives now. So it's the last chance to talk about it.
Well, the only guy that was left at the filming of this was Wilhelm. His dateline was open on, the back end when they go at the very end of the film, and
it's a point of confusion for me. Was this based on any kind of true story? Otherwise,
well, I assumed that it was based on what I just said. Is that they showed, like,
Yeah, I thought so too, but I think it's 100% fictional. Like,
yeah, I couldn't find any reference to it being a true story, so I was a little confused as to why they ran those date lines at the end.
That's disappointing.
I'm pretty sure it's 100% fictional, and I'm pretty sure they chose to do the date thing to kind of just drive home the our mothers, our fathers thing. I could be wrong, but
okay. All right, I understand it now. No, I think that makes sense, Chad.
Yeah.
Band of Brothers was based on actual events, and Ben, you haven't seen it, but they interview the actual people that the actors are portraying throughout the course of the series, and it makes it so intense. Okay, all right.
Yeah, I'm aware of that.
There's a documentary, I think, associated with this that seemed to be like the Band of Brothers interviewing the actual people thing, but it was in German and there was no way for me to get subs, so I have no idea, but I believe it's 100% fictional.
Okay.
Which I agree with you. It's a shame if it is, in the sense of, like, don't put the dates at the end there because it's confusing.
Exactly. That's changing my opinion of this show, actually, as we speak.
Yeah.
Like that really bothers me, actually. Like they shouldn't have done that. Like it's one thing to do it in Band of Brothers. Like it's like they were interviewing the actual members of Easy Company, and it's like to put it in as a fictional thing is like, come on.
Yeah.
No, just no.
Don't need to go there if it is in fact fiction. But then again, that's just assuming that it is. I don't know for sure.
I couldn't find anything to the contrary in my research. So
Nor I. What do you say we rate this and wrap this?
Yeah, I mean, that's, the third episode is just picking up the pieces and, people die and they meet in the bar that they started in.
Well, yeah, we've touched on a lot of the end bits already, and them meeting in the bar was definitely touching. And I guess whatever. I'll save that for my wrap up synopsis.
Well, this might touch on that, but I just had a kind of a question to pose to you too. What did you take away from that bar scene? Like, what was the kind of major ending note for you?
That they were broken.
Yeah.
Visibly, they looked like shells of the people they started out at. And I don't mean that they're necessarily broken in the sense of like permanently broken, but they're just, definitely had their cages rattled, no doubt.
Is that where you were at too, Benny?
I was reminded of the Avengers unenthusiastically eating shawarma. No, really, I was.
That's amazing.
It was a very similar. I mean, of course, the tone is completely different, but it was a very
it's pretty similar though. That's amazing.
Kind of scene.
I love that.
So there you go.
Yeah, same. Like I only asked the question because in that panel, one of the guys was like, "I think this movie gives the wrong message at the end, where the survivors are moving forward and everybody's a human being, and now everything's fixed." And it was just kind of like the producer's like, "What, dude? What are you talking about?"
No, I don't think so at all. I think there's a lot that portrays, how problematic things were moving forward, especially. The whole fact that Victor discovers that the Gestapo guy that sent him away on the train is now working as a sort of bureaucrat to working with the Americans, and he realizes like the Americans knew that he was, but nobody else could do the job. So they had to, it's like, I mean, that reeks of things not being fixed and things not moving forward properly and things still being fucked up. So that's just one example I can think of off the top of my head, but
no, that was super messed up.
Yeah, that was powerful for sure.
Yeah, I think that sends the point home. And Victor's attitude towards it too, how he's just like, okay, fine, he kind of throws his hands up in the air about the whole thing. He's just exasperated at that point.
Yeah, whereas in a Hollywood movie, he would have, pulled out a gun and shot him or some shit. And yeah,
exactly.
Yeah,
but I feel like he should have pulled out a gun and shot him.
I would have been pretty satisfied.
Yeah, I would have been incredibly satisfied.
But in a way, it's great that they didn't do it. It's great that Greta didn't survive. They pulled her out and lined her up and shot her. It's...
I was just going to touch on that. I was actually kind of shocked at that part. I thought for sure that it was the Americans that were coming to release her.
Yeah.
And that she was going to be back with everyone. And,
I didn't think for 1 second she was going to be one of the people that died in this.
And, it turns out it's like Colonel Clink, and he's like, "Did you think we forgot about you?" Like, oh, fuck. Like I was truly kind of shocked at that moment.
Yeah.
And also that like the whole thing was basically over, like the war. And it's like, yeah, we're still going to take you out behind the chemical shed, shoot you,
Yeah. Such a meat grinder. It's so crazy. Well, it was the same with Friedhelm getting shot in the woods. Like, I believe either just before that, there's a World War II stock footage montage saying it's 3 days till the war's over, or it's made clear that it's like 3 days away from the war being over, and he just gets shot up with his tween-age buddies in the woods. The fact that they didn't shy away from everyone just getting their shit pushed in it really made the whole story come full circle and be quite powerful.
Yeah. I got the distinct impression with Friedhelm that he did that on purpose, though.
No doubt, man.
If not to spare the Hitler Youth, like the last reserves of conscripts, or what's the word I'm looking for? draftees, like at this point, it's like the war's almost over and they're clearly just like they're conscripting kids.
Yeah, and old men
to serve. Yeah, literal 12-year-olds. So it's almost I got the impression there that Friedhelm ran into the fray, one, to just end it, and two, to sort of spare those kids the horror of.
But it almost wasn't do whatever you can to survive through it. It was just like that bit of dialogue that Kev that you brought up, where it was just like, this is pointless, it's a meat grinder, but we're gonna keep fucking going, dude.
Right.
And he just kept going until the end there, and it was just like, all right, whatever. I'm just gonna stand up. Fuck you guys. And got blasted.
Yeah. Tragic, really.
Yeah, really.
For somebody, a person of his sort of makeup.
Yeah. Yeah. To make it all about me, the person I identified with. Did you guys identify with anybody or not so much?
I don't know.
I don't know. I guess another way to say it is, does me saying I identified with him and then was like, oh shit, maybe not. Does that resonate or not really?
I don't know. I mean, I could definitely identify with all of them on some level. Friedhelm for sure, and Wilhelm, and I could identify with all of them in it for different reasons.
Which is probably what makes it powerful.
Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, Friedhelm for his idealism and his seeing that the whole thing was wrong from the get-go and not wanting to do it, and Wilhelm for his sense of duty. I get that too. And Victor for his survival skills, because he does that very well through his entire thread as he's surviving. He's making it work, man. Absolutely making it work. And I don't know, Charlotte, Greta, I mean, it's sort of the same thing. Making the sacrifice for somebody. Greta made the sacrifice for Victor, and look what got her. Got her dead, and he never even made it to New York. I mean, Jesus, man.
Right.
It's rough.
Yeah, it was for nothing.
So I can certainly identify with making sacrifices, like that. Yeah, all of them. I identified with all of them.
So shall we rate?
Sure.
I've already said it. I really enjoyed this a lot. I like the perspective this story was told from. I loved the actors. I thought the writing was good too. And, a lot of controversy, a lot of interesting things to talk about, a lot of interesting things that we talked about. But I still, at the end of it all, it's like, here's the real what of it. You're talking about a subject matter that is absolutely huge. It encompasses so much. It's like, what do you choose to talk about? You have a 10-part miniseries like Band of Brothers. What do you choose to talk about? They talked about Easy Company. Just Easy Company. And we probably could have seen 10 more, 20 more episodes about Easy Company in Band of Brothers. And that was lauded as, an incredible miniseries. Saving Private Ryan, great movie, 2.5 hours long. It's like, what do you choose to talk about when the subject matter is World War II? So for all the people that poo-pooed it, I think that they chose to go with this perspective, and I applaud that. And I really applaud that they stuck to their guns, even in the interviews afterward. Chad's mentioned that numerous times during the course of this episode. So I really, really enjoyed it. And to make a movie this realistic on an $11 million budget, my hat's off to you, man. I think some people in Hollywood could take some lessons from these guys for sure. That being said, the portrayal of the Polish, I didn't like, and I liked even less as we went through the course of this episode. So that's going to take my rating down. I did not care for that. And I also did not care for sort of downplaying the Nazi anti-Semitism and the Nazis' crimes and horribleness. So my overall rating is going to be, this is tough, but it's going to be an 8. And it would have rated it a 9 or a 9.5, aside from the whole Polish portrayal. So that's my final word. I'm going to give this an 8.
Roger that. Do you want to do a letter or no? Doesn't bother me either way.
Oh wait, what is this? A TV thing? Oh right. In that case, B-.
Yeah, no worries. You want to go, Benny?
Sure. The actors in this were terrific. I think the idea of what they were trying to do, I think it's an interesting one, and I think that it's a story that should probably be heard. I still can't shake the feeling that, and this sucks because I can't really necessarily articulate what I would have done differently, but I feel like there's a bunch of stuff perhaps left on the table, or, some elephants in the room that were some things that were danced around that they should have taken on head on instead of going around it. The jump aheads drove me nuts. So I don't know. I think, but I really have to give it to the actors in this. I thought everybody did a fantastic job in the film. And I do have some gripes with it, but it's not an easy topic to tackle. And that being said, I thought they did a fairly decent job. So I'm going to give them a C.
Yeah, right. That's fair. And the shawarma scene gives it a bit of bonus points too, right?
Yes.
Yeah, it's very similar. My view is very similar to your guys. I think, the major strong suit for me is just the fact that it's a new perspective for me to see. I'm sure there's plenty of, German language stuff that I've never heard of before, but I'm just really stoked to be able to see something that was from a different perspective, just because so many things are from a American or Hollywood perspective most of the time, at least the stuff I'm exposed to.
Absolutely.
But as far as the weak links for it, like, you both covered a lot of it, but I found some of the storytelling just kind of slightly eye-rolly, in the sense that, like, there's an entire theater of war and that people keep running into each other kind of bullshit. But I get it from a storytelling perspective. Like, you gotta kind of keep it tight, and the whole point is to tell 5 different viewpoints in the space from the Germans' perspective. So, just because they keep running into each other all the time, like, it's forgivable. It just means it's not an A+, bit of filmmaking. So yeah, for me, I'm very similar. I'm a B. I didn't have a problem with any of the glossing or, unbalanced criticism, because I just didn't know better. I kind of came at it from the perspective of, like, I've seen a lot of World War II stuff before. I'm very aware of World War II. I'm aware of the concentration camps, and so it didn't bother me that they didn't go there. I didn't take it as them leaving it out intentionally. I just took it as they were choosing to keep their story focused in other areas. But the Polish situation that you mentioned, Kev, like, I was just completely ignorant to it, so it had no real impact on me the first time around until I read about it. So I definitely echo your sentiments of it being unfortunate. But yeah, solid B for me. And I think regardless of the rating, it's worth a watch.
No question. This is really, really good. Watch it. I would encourage anybody to watch it. And again, I want to just, I think what you just said, Chad, I really enjoyed that this was not from the U.S. Like, this came from somebody else. And really more importantly, that it came from Germany itself. I think that's huge. And I think that also plays into people being critical of Germany. Like, that's difficult to do, man. Like, let's go make a story about, like, our worst moment, period.
Yeah.
And it's like, what do you tackle? So cut them some slack, folks. All haters out there, cut them a little slack. You go make your own World War II movie.
And I think the cutting them some slack thing makes sense, in the sense of, like, some people will be like, well, no, man, I don't want to cut them slack. They're fucking Nazis, man, blah, blah, blah. And it's just like, I take what they're attempting to do is, like, processing something as crazy as that for a nation is going to be really difficult, and there's going to be lots of trips and falls and stumbles, and even just attempting to approach and or start processing it's worth doing. And them saying that they want to open this dialogue while the people that actually experienced it are still alive, so that the kids these days can actually learn something from them instead of just ignoring it or glossing over it. Like, at least they had what it sounds like what you're saying, and what I'm echoing is they had the cojones to actually tackle the material, and fair play.
I agree.
Me too. I agree with myself. You still there, Kev? Kev.
His icon is in the call still, but
yeah.
Now I'm left not knowing what to say.
Yeah, you got to do the outro, Benny. Now you should do your best Kev impression and do one.
Do what? I want to hear this now. Sorry, I had to pee so bad I couldn't stand it. But I couldn't say anything because you were in the middle of a roll.
Oh, okay. I got to the end of my sentence and it was like 5 seconds of silence. Then Ben's like, I agree. It's like, Cam, are you still there? It was funny.
Oh, were you going to do me responding?
He was trying to get me to do the outro.
There you go. That would be great. He's not into it. Okay.
Fair enough.
I wouldn't want to just wing it, reading it, off the page like that. That would not work.
Yeah, tough. It's tough.
You have a hard time every week with some of the things that are said in that outro. So I would have to read over it several times before I could actually try and deliver it.
Yeah, our outro is basically like the outro to every Micro Machines commercial. With that dude that talks so fast. Remember him?
Yeah, the fast talking dude.
Why do you think that?
Because of like the way that it's written is so fumbly that it's like a fucking tongue twister to get through.
Oh my god, yeah. Whatever. I don't need to share that story right now. I've actually had to do I can share it. It's whatever. I've had to do some of that for some of the voice jobs that I've done, like
like the really fast talking copy bullshit.
Yeah, I've had a couple of auditions. None of them were live auditions, like in-person auditions, but they were ones that I've sent in to my agent, and they were like, "Yeah, you need to read this, as fast as you can." And it's one thing to listen to the Micro Machines guy. It's another thing to make fun of him trying to do that, and it is a whole nother thing to actually try to do it like with any level of intelligibility, and it is really, really hard.
I bet it is.
And I really sucked at it when I did it, so it was terrible. So, algorithm, C-Lab Forever, what is happening next week? I'm excited, and so is Jarhigo. Go.
Speaking on behalf of Jarhigo, Jarhigo actually brought this one to the table, Nausicaä of the Valley of the Wind, Miyazaki film from the mid-'80s. It's our first Miyazaki, so I'm pumped to check it out.
Yeah.
Everything's gonna be okay.
It's a great movie.
Stupid. As far as deaths go, there was enough Germans and Russians dying in this teleplay that was enough. I had an egregious death. I stepped on a landmine there with that stupid Fifth Element reference, and then I don't know, somebody else. You guys each died once. I don't remember how.
I'm sure there were deaths in there.
Yeah, unquestionably,
unequivocally.
But I agree, there was enough dying in this for one podcast.
Yeah, this is definitely on the heavier side. So, at any rate, folks, stay tuned next week, or rather, join us next week for this Miyazaki conversation that we're going to be having. And thanks for tuning in and riding along with us on this one. And we'll see you on another time.
See ya.
Smell you later.
Smell you
later to close out the Nazi show.
Just trying to bring a little levity.
You nailed it, man. And that's going to wrap up this week's episode, folks. Next week, we're going to be talking about the Miyazaki film Nausicaä, so join us for that one. That's going to be fun. You can find the show notes for today's episode in your podcast app of choice, or at our website, abd.fm/episodes/ thank you, 44. Or at our website, ebd.fm/episodes/ 44. Should I be reading this like the Micro Machines?
Oh, I don't know if that'll stay on the show, but we should definitely do a take like that.
Let me do one take like that after I finish this. You can shoot us questions using the Twitter hashtag AskEBD, and you can find me at Molverine on Twitter. That's MOHLVERINE. Chad is at Chad Normal on Twitter, and Ben is at Jarhigo on Twitter. That's JARHEEGO. I'd like to take a minute, as always, folks, to thank all of you so much for tuning into the show. It means tons to me and the boys. And if you'd like to support the show, there are a couple great ways you can do it. First, by rating and reviewing us on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you happen to get your podcasts. The other way you can do it is by telling somebody about the show. Word of mouth is incredibly effective and incredibly powerful. So please, pass the word on. Thanks so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time. right, Micro Machines take.
Do it.
I should take my headphones off because you guys are probably going to start laughing. That's going to screw me up. And that's going to wrap up this week's episode. Next week, we're going to be talking about Nausicaä. You can find the show notes for today's episode in your podcast app of choice on our website, ebd.fm/episodes/44. You can shoot us questions using the Twitter hashtag AskEBD. You can find me at Moverine on Twitter. That's MOHLVERINE. Chad is at Chad Normal on Twitter. Ben is at Jarhego on Twitter. That's JARHEGO. I'd like to take a minute and thank everybody so much for tuning into the show. If you'd like to support the show, there are two great ways you can do it. First, by rating and reviewing us on iTunes, wherever you get your podcast muffins, or you can tell somebody to check out the show. Word of mouth is incredibly powerful and incredibly effective. Thanks so much, and we'll see you next time. Nailed it.
That's amazing.
That's pretty good, man. I'm impressed with my own ability. Wow.
That's good stuff. Now I want to keep the Micro Machines bit in so we can leave that in.
See, it's, I mean, I always, a lot of times I'll if I think something's great that it just can't really put it anywhere else, that's when I throw it at the end of the outro theme music,
Totally.
So it's you can, do that, or one time I threw in there was a couple things you said in a show, Chad, that I loved, and I thought they were so funny, and I was like, I just throw it at the end.
Yeah, exactly. Sometimes it's nice
it's like a garbage dump for our garbage.
Yeah. Totally.
It's the post-credit scene. It's the secret track at the end of the CD.
That's exactly right, Benny.
Yeah, once we become a super popular show, we should get Samuel L. Jackson to do a post-credit scene with us one time.
Yeah, eating shawarma or something.
Yeah, exactly. It's just the sound of us eating shawarma with Samuel L. Jackson.
Yeah, there you go. The sound of it.
But he doesn't actually say anything. It's actually him just eating shawarma. He doesn't say shit.
Oh man, you know what I should do for this one is I should craft a little audio drama scene of us eating shawarma. Put a restaurant thing in the background.
Do it.
You could
probably just take the audio from the shawarma scene in Avengers. It probably would be perfect because there's no talking in it.
Or at our website, ebd.fm/episodes/43. And that's going to wrap up this week's episode, folks. Thanks for joining us. Next week, we're going to be talking about the German production miniseries Generation War. So definitely stay tuned for that. That's going to be an interesting one.